This video was made possible by Raycon. Get top quality, comfortable, and surprisingly affordable wireless earbuds for 15% off at buyraycon.com/Wendover. Just about once every 3 days, somewhere in the world, a large commercial passenger plane crashes. Most of these are not hugely catastrophic because most of these are fatality-free. Of the 1,070 recorded crashes in the 2010s decade, only 112 proved fatal. Even of these, the vast majority of passengers survive an average fatal crash. In fact, half of all deaths from airline crashes in the previous decade are from just 12 incidents. That's to say, most fatal aircraft accidents are not the kinds you see in movies, the kinds where there are few or no survivors. Most are more minor incidents with just one or two or a few more unlucky victims. The industry, though, does not view them that way. The truth is that people fear airplanes an irrational amount, so in order for air travel to be as commonplace as it is, they require a standard of safety far higher than any other method of transport. Safety and profitability go hand in hand for airlines. Despite this, though, accidents are effectively an inevitability for any of the largest airlines. Statistically, some of these largest airlines are also some of the safest, yet none are 100% safe. Therefore, with enough flying, an accident will happen. All 10 of the world's largest airlines have had fatal accidents in their histories, and so, with this level of inevitability, airlines must have a strictly defined plan for what to do after one of their airplanes crash. So, let's say an accident happens. This will almost certainly have something to do with landing or taking off. The overwhelming majority of accidents involve the runway. However, if an accident is fatal, it is much more likely that it has to do with a loss of control in flight or a controlled crash into terrain. Runway accidents represent more than 90% of accidents, but only account for 25% of fatal accidents. The airline really never is the first responder to an accident. That is typically firefighters and other emergency personnel, but as soon as word of an accident reaches them, the airline will begin to mobilize. Almost every airline out there will have what's called a GO team. This is a group of people, typically working at the airline's headquarters, who train to be part of the crisis response function on top of their ordinary jobs. With larger airlines, this GO team can be comprised of as many as hundreds of individuals filling a huge variety of functions. Larger long-haul airlines might also have smaller teams comprised of people working at their outstations who can more quickly get to crash sites while the main team travels from a headquarters. Now, each airline will have different procedures and protocols, but there are loose standards adopted by all. Typically within 3 to 4 hours of a crash, an airline's GO team will have assembled and taken off from the headquarters airport. Usually, a standby flight crew and aircraft would be used for this dedicated flight. With them, they'd bring a GO kit. Considering accidents can happen quite literally anywhere, this would include all sorts of things like satellite communications equipment, food, water, cooking equipment, personal protective equipment, warm clothing, tents, generators, tools, and more. The team's personnel are typically split up into dealing with 3 main areas: crisis support, humanitarian support, and communications. Each of these would likely be split up into a forward team and rear team. If the crash occurs in a remote location, for example, the forward team, including the most essential members of each of the larger teams, would likely go to the crash site and set up a literal base camp using the equipment in the GO kit. Meanwhile, the rear team might set up in the nearest town with accommodations and facilities. At the crash site, a triage area is set up away and upwind from the aircraft wreckage. This might be done by some of the crisis response GO team members or by emergency personnel. There, individuals would be split up into 3 groups: deceased, injured, and uninjured. The deceased and injured would typically be cared for by firefighters, medics, and other emergency personnel, whereas the airline GO team would likely deal with the uninjured passengers. The rear GO team will have, meanwhile, set up a survivor reception center, usually at a nearby hotel, and arrange transportation to that site. The largest group in the GO team is typically the Humanitarian Assistance Team, which is made up of volunteers among the airline's customer service staff, flight attendants, airport agents, and others. By grouping the passengers together in one facility, the airline separates them from media and centralizes them for investigatory interviews and support functions. The aircraft's surviving crew will typically be dealt with by a different team, which would bring them to a different facility than the passengers, which is recommended for both legal and public relations reasons. Another subset of the humanitarian assistance team will set up a facility for friends and family of the passengers near the accident site. They might also set up a separate facility at the origin or destination of the flight, where large clusters of friends and family might be. The individuals there would be provided with updates as a group, and then would be sorted so that friends and families of survivors would be brought to an area to reunite, whereas others might be broken the news that their family member or friend has died. The role of these family assistance centers is amplified in the case of crashes where there is a significant long-term search and rescue operation, as is often the case with crashes into the ocean. In the case of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 disappearance, for example, the family assistance centers were in operation for 2 months. The passenger and family assistance centers might need to house hundreds and thousands of individuals respectively, so the setup and functions of these is likely defined prior to any accident. Airlines will decide, for example, that they need a general lounge, a faith area, a psychological assistance area, a press area, a phone and internet area, and more beforehand, and then it's just about deciding which area goes where once a location for the facility is identified. With this and all other response efforts, actions are proceduralized so that each member of the team knows what to do, even in a fast-moving, chaotic scenario. Away from the crash site, airlines will set up a crisis command center in their headquarters, including executives from each aspect of the airline's operations in order to coordinate their response. In addition, a call center is often quickly set up and staffed to answer questions from family and friends of passengers and the media. This is just a small part of the overall communications efforts though, because more than anything else, probably the best thing an airline can do for themselves after an accident is communicate. That's why the third primary aspect of a GO team, beyond crisis and humanitarian response, is communications. After one of their aircraft crash, an airline is concerned with business continuity. They're concerned with how they'll emerge from the other end of the incident, and so their communications have to be strategic. Crisis communications is a subset of public relations intended to minimize reputational damage after an incident at a company. Within this, airlines want to be sure that, to the extent possible, they are able to control the narrative. That means they need to communicate fast and loudly to drown out any other noise. So, they put communications GO team members on site to be able to disseminate accurate information as fast as possible to the media, survivors, and family and friends. There will also, however, be a team back at the airline HQ that will have to make more methodical, strategic communications decisions. Now, at the end of the day, there ends up being two main options for responding to an incident: accepting blame or deferring blame. Academic research into the matter shows that taking responsibility early typically leads to a better public response and actually tends to decrease the size of settlements that end up getting paid out. However, the risk one runs is that, by accepting responsibility, this can open up a company to legal consequences. Therefore, despite overwhelming evidence that it is not the prudent move, organizations will often defer responsibility until it is absolutely certain that it is indeed their fault. If it is absolutely sure that an accident is not the airline's fault, such as in the case of aircraft manufacturing defects, deferring blame can actually shift public sentiment to position the airline as a victim themselves, but the evidence for such cases typically only becomes conclusive after years of investigation, so in the immediate aftermath of a crash, it can seem to the public as evading responsibility. Therefore, deciding whether to take or shift blame is quite the tough choice for airlines. One of the recent case studies in crisis communication involves Southwest Airlines Flight 1308 in 2018. Shortly upon reaching cruise after its departure from LaGuardia Airport, its left engine failed and fragments were flung into the aircraft fuselage. With that, one window was broken, and due to the rapid decompression and fast-moving debris, the passenger sitting next to that window died from her injuries. The aircraft ended up landing safely, and there were only minor injuries among the other passengers, but for Southwest, this was a major crisis. It was the first aircraft accident fatality in the US since 2009, and their first ever. Southwest essentially took responsibility right away, giving each passenger $5,000 in cash and $1,000 in flight credits. They also, very quickly, issued empathetic, personable statements which, combined with their prior positive reputation, were effective in persuading the public that they were truly sorry. The company also paused all marketing for a month to let the sensitive situation fade away in public discourse, so, all told, this incident and its response cost them about $100 million. In the end, after the investigation was fully completed, it was determined that it probably wasn't Southwest's fault. The accident was caused by a tiny, largely invisible fatigue fracture on one of the engine's fan blades. Southwest followed all maintenance and inspection protocols for this aircraft, but for some reason these didn't catch the issue. Therefore, the protocols were updated after the fact. Southwest went for the expensive yet effective crisis communication method. If they had deferred blame, they might have been able to lose less money, but if in the end it was found that they should bear some blame, this could result in significant reputational damage. In the immediate response to a plane crash, the incentives of the airline and victims are often aligned because the public responds positively to positive treatment of the victims. It is later on, though, where incentives increasingly split. Victims often look for compensation, airlines look to minimize their financial responsibility. By that time, the public is no longer interested in a plane crash. Crashes are interesting when there's a burning pile of debris, not when a bunch of lawyers are sitting in a courtroom. Therefore, that's exactly why airlines put a huge, disproportionate amount of planning, money, and effort into the phase of response with the burning pile of debris. It's the most effective use of those resources, and at the end of the day, to airlines, airplane crashes are a financial problem. If you're anything like me, you listen to music, podcasts, and audiobooks constantly while working. That means that you probably have earbuds in for many hours per day, so it's worth making sure the ones you use are good. Having now tried them, I can attest that Raycon's wireless earbuds are good. They have great audio quality and are super comfortable, yet they also stayed in perfectly while I was out on a run, which was impressive. Their everyday E25s have 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, a compact noise-isolating fit, and most impressively, they cost about half as much as comparable premium wireless earbuds. On top of that, they're an even better deal considering they're giving Wendover viewers 15% off by going to buyraycon.com/Wendover, and you'll be supporting the channel with your purchase.